It's very common for kids or teenagers, as soon as they're given the slightest bit of freedom, to start going nuts. One of the standard stereotypical things is kid goes off to college, kid gets wasted, kid drops out of school, kid gets pregnant, kid does drugs, blah blah blah. And a lot of parents wonder what they did wrong. A lot of parents wonder why this happened. A lot of them think it's because they just didn't get enough discipline while they were at home, and that's the common misconception. And I want to talk about this a little bit because I think a lot of parents and a lot of adults, they really, really, really forget what it was like to be a kid, and that lack of memory of what it was like to actually be experiencing this and to be a kid is what causes them to have these come to these conclusions. And if you remember what it's like to be a kid, you're going to understand the experience that I'm about to tell you about that I had a few weeks ago. So I go to take this state test, right? And I'm about to walk into the room, and there's this woman, minimum 70 years old, standing in the room. She's just standing there, and she looks like kind of one of those Catholic school nun teachers. And not to say anything bad about any particular religion, but if you went to a Catholic school and you had one of those nuns that grew up in the 40s and the 50s and the 30s teaching you, you know what I'm talking about. Like they with the whole yardstick and the hands thing and the. But I'm not going to get into that just yet. And I walk into the room, and they told us you can walk into the room and sit for your test. I go into the room and I sit down, and she looks at me and she yells. She goes, "Don't sit there!" Not, "Can you please get up?" Not, "That seat is reserved." Not, "I'd like to show you this before you sit down." "Don't sit there!" I'm like, I'm just looking at her like, huh? She's like, "You're not supposed to sit there yet." And this is really one of the pivotal moments that people don't realize about being a kid versus being an adult. See, as an adult, nobody does that to you. As an as an adult, if they say walk into this room to take a test and you can be seated, and you go to sit down and they do that, the only right answer is really just go fuck yourself. But as a kid, that is your world. That is your life. Like, you're getting yelled at all the time for these things that are really not your fault. How the fuck am I supposed to know that when you say, walk into this room to take this test and seat yourself, that I'm not actually supposed to sit down because she wants to seat everybody in a particular manner? I completely understand why she wants to seat people in a particular manner, in particular rows. I understand if you want to do that. You can say, "Excuse me, can you just not sit down yet because I have a different seating arrangement? Please don't sit down yet. Or can you get up so I can put you in different places?" No. Don't sit there. What the fuck is wrong with you? And call me crazy for guessing it, but she wound up telling us that she was a Catholic school teacher. That she was a nun and she was a Catholic school teacher. Again, if you had one of those nuns from who grew up in the 30s, 40s, and 50s teaching you in Catholic school, and you're familiar with the yardsticks across the hands and all that other stuff, I'm not going to get into religious arguments. I'm just going to say, you know what I'm talking about. That shit was scary. I luckily had very limited experience with that. Very limited, before I just went back to the regular miserable public school that most people go to. But that's how kids are treated. You see, adults are treated with respect. Even when we don't get along, there's still some fundamental basic level of respect that we give one another. Whereas children are constantly treated and we always assume the worst of them. And it's that constant assuming the worst that makes them act this way when they're actually treated like human beings. They're not prepared for the real world. They're not prepared to be treated like human beings because they've been being treated like pieces of crap their entire life. And again, we put this out of our head because we don't need it in our head once we're 17, 19, 20, 25, 45, 50. We're not being treated like crap anymore, so we just kind of forget about it. I still remember what it was like to be 5 years old, 10 years old, 15 years old, and to sit in a classroom with miserable people who would treat you like you were a piece of shit. And they would always assume the worst. Everybody here remember what the first day of school was like in 6th grade and 7th grade and 8th grade? You'd have every single teacher explaining how everything works to you. At least 2 or 3 of them would be explaining everything to you in terms of, if you do this, you're going to get this, this is going to happen to you. And if you do this wrong, this is going to happen to you. And I don't want you to think that you'll be able to get this by me because you won't. They start off assuming the worst. And what I found as an employer is that when you assume the worst of people, you often get your assumption. You really do. You project it and you make it come true. I had a receptionist that was not very computer savvy, was not really mechanically savvy, was not really technically savvy. And one day, I just dropped a machine on her desk and I said, "Place the keyboard on this." And she goes, "I don't know how to." And I go, Well, you've watched me do it a lot of times, and you do all these other things, and I don't know how to do all these other things, right? Do you, correct? And she goes, yes. So you're probably smarter than me. So I'm sure you'll figure this out. And she figured it out. I wasn't being condescending. I wasn't being mean. I legitimately assumed the best. Fucking cold. I legitimately assumed the best of her and her capabilities. She is fixing retina screens in 25 minutes, air screens in 15 minutes. She's aligning BGA chips on this machine. 2 years ago, I couldn't get her to touch a computer. But really, this really does happen. And it's not because I'm some great boss. It's not because I'm some great teacher. It's not because I'm some great person or great manager. It's just the power of assuming the best of people. When you assume the best of people, you get the best out of people. And when it comes to children, when it comes to our kids, teachers assume the worst. They talk to you like you're pond scum. They talk to you like you're a nuisance, like you're a bother, like you're a hassle. And this is what we become accustomed to as children. And then you get home and you have your parents yelling at you and screaming at you for all these other things. And they think that that's good. They think that means that they're being disciplinary, that they're being a tough parent, that they're not being like these other parents that let their kids get away with murder. No, my kid's gonna know better. They're doing parenting for them. They're not doing parenting for the kids. They're not doing good. They're not doing what they think is good parenting for the kids. They're doing good parenting so that they can say, well, look at what my kid does. My kid wouldn't dare act like that in my house. I send my kid to the best school, not to the crappy school. You know what the best school has that the public school doesn't have? Better drugs. You know, it's too serious. Like it's Susan. This is another thing, because a lot of people think that if they send their kids to better schools, if they send them to a private school or to like an expensive preschool, they're going to do better. The expensive preschool, seriously, they have better. They're the ones that are using Kleenex to wipe their tears and clean puke when they cry instead of toilet paper. At the good private high school, that's the one where you have a choice of cocaine or ecstasy or heroin, whereas at Susan Wagner High School, you have a choice of $5 Newports in the bathroom or Robitussin. Like really, I was never into that, by the way. I don't like smoke, and there are very few things that you could do to make me cry, but making me drink a teaspoon of Robitussin is a very good way to try. That it's disgusting. I don't want. I'm sick right now. Seriously, if you told me that this cough would go away instantly if I had a teaspoon of Robitussin, I'd be coughing my lung out for the rest of my life. That shit is disgusting. I don't know why people choose to use that to get high, but they do. But yeah, really, like when it comes to better school, most of the time what you're getting are better drugs. So that again, with the better school, with the $25,000 a year, $50,000 a year private school, it's not always the better education. It really does come down to better drugs. Again, there are a lot of kids that come out of those schools that are just as fucked up as the kids that came out of Susan Wagner High School. But yeah, in general, you are treating your kids like kids, but then you expect them to act like adults. Does that make any sense? No, it doesn't. Anyway, so I'm looking at this woman like, whatever. I wait to be seated. She's giving out the sheets. I eventually go up and give her the sheets, and I'm about to put it. She said, when you're done with the test, come and put it on my desk. I go to put it on there. She goes, not there. Is this your desk? Yeah, but I didn't tell you to put it there. But you said to put it on the desk. Don't tell me what I said. Stop being a wise ass. It's all, I know that this is not how adults usually treat adults, but seriously, the reason this is all coming back to me is because this is how adults treat children. How many times at school were you yelled at for ridiculous bullshit? How many times at school were you treated like crap for no reason? Were you yelled at and bitched at and disciplined for being a wise ass when you were not being a wise ass? It really is ridiculous, and it really is the result of trapping children in this Stockholm Syndrome type environment. Again, the only way that you're going to gain respect for this person is if you fall victim to Stockholm Syndrome. Like, what do you expect out of people when you trap them in a hot, humid room for 9 hours a day, somewhere where they don't want to be, and expect them to do anything while you're consistently bitching at them and belittling them and berating them and treating them like children? You expect dignified adult behavior. Do you expect when they are actually given freedom that they're not going to be unprepared for it because they never experienced it as a child? You're insane. I still remember my dad never, ever, ever punished me. He would sit me down and say, Louis, if you want to do this, go ahead. But let me show you what's going to happen. Or he'd say, Louis, let me tell you a story. And he would go on and tell some 10 or 20 or 30-minute story. I wouldn't like listening to it all the time. But it would have a beginning, a middle, and an end. It would have logic, it would have reason, and it would be something that was plausible. And I'd say, you know what? I liked what I was doing, but I don't really want to end up the way that the end of that story ends up. So I'm not going to do that. And because my dad, even at 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 years old, would actually sit me down and talk to me and deal with me like a fucking human being and not like a piece of shit or a rabid dog or a bum, I actually listened. I learned, and I had that freedom, and I had that respect for him, and I respected his authority because he gained it through a natural way. Through a natural way. And it's something that a lot of kids don't get. It's something that a lot of kids don't have. Again, when you treat them like that, what do you expect? And when they go out into the real world and they get to experience this freedom, like I still remember the first time I went to a real restaurant on my own, and they're like, oh, I'm sorry, would you not like to sit here? Yeah, let's make this available for you. It's not, oh, you're being a wise ass, or oh, fuck you, sit there because I told you to. It's, oh, let me try to accommodate you because you have a legitimate, logical reason for wanting something to be different. Oh my God, you mean I'm a human being? You mean what I think matters? You mean what I want matters? You mean I actually have a brain and I'm equal to you? It was pretty damn amazing because that's not how I was used to being treated. And when you take kids out into the real world, that's what happens because they're not used to being treated that way because you never exposed them to it. And you know, I still remember giving the test back to that woman. I still got a big smile on my face. And she looks at me and she's like, what are you smiling for? I said, you're not going to knock the smile off my face. I'm leaving. And when I leave, I may go to the zoo. I may go to the Museum of Modern Art. I may go to work. I may just go home where there's nobody who can complain about where I sit or where I put down a piece of paper. Whereas you're stuck in a room with no air conditioning, a broken fan, flickering fluorescent lights, and miserable people for the next 5 hours. I'm not getting the smile off my face at all. I don't give a crap what you say. Which, needless to say, is probably why my test results are not in the mail several weeks later. I knew that the fee that I paid to take that test went down the drain the moment that I opened my mouth to this woman. But really, truthfully, as a kid, you can take the smile off my face. You can make my parents sign notes about how I'm bad. You can fail me and make me do stuff over and over again. You can say that because I said, I am tired of being yelled at for no reason, that I'm being a wise ass, and now I have to write this fucking word, this list of words 25 times each, and waste 3 hours of my life. You would have the power to make my life miserable. But as an adult, you can be as miserable as you want for this limited period of time and this limited interaction. But this limited interaction will end. And when it ends, I'm going to go back to the real world where I get to be treated like an adult, where I get to only deal with people who are respectful and treat them in kind, whereas you are stuck in this little hot, humid, miserable, flickering box for 4 hours where you're probably making less money than my receptionist. So yeah, I'm going to keep smiling. Fuck you. So, moral of the story, why do kids go nuts when they have a chance to leave and go off to college? Or why do they go nuts when they just get to go out into the world and see how things are? It's not because they're bad kids. It's not because of all the drugs and the violence and the sex and the tattoos and the bad influence and the Eminem. It's the Eminem and that damn Kid Rock and Miley Cyrus and Kanye West and rap music. No, it's because you never gave them freedom. And they don't know how to react to freedom. And they are still traumatized from dealing with 10 to 15 years of the worst being assumed of them. 10 to 15 years of being round up like sheep and being bitched at and whipped and not physically whipped, but mentally whipped in this terrible fashion. Again, you sit down for the first day of school, the first thing you hear are 8 different people tell you how they're not going to put up with your shit and how you're going to get in this much trouble if you do this type of stuff and how you can't go to the bathroom unless I say you can. And you wonder why kids grow up fucked up. You know who knows how to earn authority? I had this my senior class English teacher, Mr. Pelinkovic. If he still works at Susan Wagner High School, as much as he deserves better in life than being a public school teacher or a public school dean, I really hope he's doing it, not out of selfish reasons, but because kids need to learn from somebody like him. Kids need to have a role model like him. He wouldn't just sit there and bitch at you all day. He would start the first day of class saying, here's what we're going to do, here's what we're going to learn, here's how we're going to do it, and he started it with excitement. He walked into the room every day with excitement. This is what we're going to do. This is why we're going to be happy to do it. And he would become legitimately excited as you learned. As you learned and as you were answering questions, he would point out things and he would go, why do you think this is happening? He would just look at you. And it could be the simplest answer. It could be an answer that somebody with an 80 IQ would get. But if you got it, he'd go, that's right. Good. He would high five you. He'd smile. He would get really, really into it and excited when people were catching on, even to the simplest of stuff. And as long as you had that basic level of respect for him, as long as you showed that you were listening, as long as you showed that you were trying, he would do the world to make you feel good about yourself and to get you to get excited about what it was that was going on and to relate everything to you in your terms, instead of sitting there going, okay, here's Romeo and Juliet. Romeo did, now read, read, read line 1. No, read it louder. It wasn't that type of, you know the difference between the two different types of teachers, and you know which ones were effective, and you know which ones earned your authority versus which ones just beat it out of you until the point where you just realized, I have no freedom. I'm not a human being as long as I'm sitting in this classroom. So I might as well just sit, pretend I'm not falling asleep, and dream of a day that I'm out of here. And when people would mess around in his class, or people would do things they weren't supposed to, he wouldn't just say, you get a 0 for the day. He would go, why are you late? No. And he would explain to you how in the real world, he's like, I don't get to be late. If I show up here after 8:30, I lose my job. Nobody cares. Do you think my boss in the next room cares? He was says, do you think that I'm trying to remember the name for the department head. I don't remember. Like, do you think the department head in the next room cares that my car broke down? Do you think the person in the next room cares that I argued with my kid or whatever? No. They care that you have a class at 8:25. If you're not here at 8:25, then you can't teach this class. Then these kids can do whatever they want, and I'm fired. It's not fair. If I don't get that, why do you get that? He wouldn't care. Seriously, if you had notes written by your parents, if you had a note written by the bus driver, he would literally look at it and tear it up, but he would explain it to you. And he would also expect nothing of you that he didn't expect of himself. He wasn't a hypocrite. He earned authority in a very, very natural way. And I know it sounds silly, but you simply have to sit in his course to understand how this worked. If you challenged him on some silly, mundane bullshit, he wouldn't just say you get a 0 or you're not supposed to do that because you're the kid and I'm the teacher. He never worked that whole you're the kid and I'm the teacher paradigm, so you do what I tell you. He would just make you feel bad about yourself or whatever you were doing. So if you were doing something to get attention, he would kind of bring out in a really bad way why you were needy. And then he would start to bring out why it is an undesirable trait to be needy. And what he would do, again, he wouldn't just start saying you get a 0 and bitching at you. He'd be bitching at you in a way where the rest of the class would be looking at you like, man, he got you. Or, man, I don't want to be like you. Or, oh, he would really do that. And it's not abusive. He was legitimately pointing out why it is you should not act in a certain way, not just because you're going to get a 0 or a bad grade or because I'm going to yell at you because you're being a wide-ass. He was actually showing how that's a negative personality trait in the real world, and he would bring it out of you in a manner where the rest of these kids who are your peers would laugh at you for having that negative personality trait. But then he would simultaneously cheer you on to, if you were catching on to his course, he would cheer you on to get answers right. He would encourage you, and he would always be happy when you were catching on, and he'd always encourage you to catch on, and he'd always be really excited about it, more so than other teachers. It was just, again, I can't really describe the dynamic in a video, but it's such an organic and natural way to earn authority from people. It's about assuming the best of people. It's about treating them with respect, even if they're younger than you, even if they're at a lower level of authority than you. And not just jumping in with, this is why you listen to me. This is why I'm right and you're wrong. It's about assuming the other person is a human being and treating them accordingly. And if you actually got to sit in on Mr. P's class, you'd understand what I'm saying. I'm not kidding when I say that there are things I learned in that class sitting there at 14 years old as a sophomore and then again as a senior in his English class when I was 14 and he was 27, which is the age that I'm about to be, that I'm applying to management, to employ, to my dealing with my vendors, to dealing with my employees, to selling customers, to selling other people. I apply these basic little principles of earning authority organically to all these other portions of my life. I learned a decent amount about Macbeth and Othello in his class, but what I really took away from his class was how to deal with people, how to earn respect, how to earn authority. And it's something that I really am going to carry with me for the rest of my life. And it's something that, again, I learned from my dad, I learned from my teacher, and I learned that you can be in a position of authority, but without having to act in that ridiculous manner where you're just screaming at people for no reason because you have authority and you're always looking for a way where you're always going to be right and they're always going to be wrong just because. That's not how you treat people. That's not how you would treat people that are your age. That's not how you treat children. That's not how you treat students. And again, if you expect that your kids are going to grow up and be, good, productive members of society, and this is where you're sending them and this is how you're treating them, you really have no right to expect that that's how they're going to grow up. That's all I have to say. Remember what it was like to be a kid. Don't forget, just because you're an adult, what it felt like to be sitting in a class and getting talked to like that. And again, it's not because people are kids. And I knew that it wasn't right when I was 10 and 11 and 12 years old. I knew that the experience of being held hostage in a room for 9 or 10 hours against my will to learn things that I'm not interested in, I knew that that wasn't the way to learn. And I knew they were just saying, you're kids, you're immature, that's why. And then I'm sitting in college classes where people are texting on their phone. I took a licensing course recently where, I'm not kidding, I'm sitting in a classroom where I'm one of the youngest people there at 26. There are people who are 30 there. There are people who are 40 there. There are people in their mid-50s that are sitting in that class, and it's the same shit. You have an instructor, good instructor, but you have an instructor who's taking people's phones away. He's taking people's phones and saying, okay, I'm going to bring this up. You get this at the end of class. He's giving people demerits. He's yelling at people for talking. He's breaking people up and moving them around so that he can teach his course. He's sitting there and going, okay, I'll wait till you're done talking so that I can talk. It's not a natural experience. Again, among people that are 30, 40, and 50 years old, we are out of dealing with children. We are out of dealing with immature children. This is a class of 40 or 50 people, and the same thing is happening. And I knew it. I just knew it as a kid. I knew it when all these adults are saying that's not how adults would act, that they're full of shit. I knew if the tables were turned and I was talking to you like you were talking to me, and I was saying you're going to sit here and listen to me talk to you the same way that you're talking to me for 9 hours, that you wouldn't just sit there and take it, that you wouldn't just sit there and act perfectly. And being an adult and having the time to take these mandatory courses where you're put in the same kind of hostage situation, it really reaffirms to me that I was right.